My name is Thomas Macias. Just a little background. Sometimes people can connect on things we didn't know we had in common. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, in the United States, obviously in the American Southwest, along not too far from the 2,000-mile border with Mexico in the Southwest. That certainly has influenced my history, my family, etc. This is not my first foray into living abroad. Back in my earlier days out of college, I was in the Peace Corps for a few years. I was 2 years in Costa Rica and a year in Argentina. I had a degree in marketing. I was a business major. And so I worked with actually USAID in Costa Rica, managing a small loan fund. It was something in the past. I know at least one of you, Elliot, I know you're in the Peace Corps as well. Grad school, when I came back, I went to the University of New Mexico, got my master's degree in sociology there, and then I continued on to Madison, Wisconsin, where I finished my PhD in sociology back in 2002, something like that. And I've been at the University of Vermont since 2003, and in the sociology department. I've kind of shifted back and forth a little bit with my research. My focus when I started was looking mainly at immigration in the Southwest, kind of how generations of Mexican immigration kind of defines the subpopulation of the United States. And since I've been in Vermont, perhaps this is not a surprise, I have shifted a little bit more looking at environmental sociology and some of the kind of the social determinants of, it's, I guess, somewhat connected to the previous presentation, the perception of risk, of environmental risk, and moreover, the willingness to do something about climate, about the situation, the ecological situation in particular, and I've actually come back and tied that to people's immigrant origins. Just as the photo indicates, my significant others, my wife Marielle is right here in the middle of the room right now today, and my two kids, Enzo, they're on the right, and Layla on the left. They are in school across the street at the public school right now, and they're doing great, thank you. But anyway, I'm the only one of the four of us who's not a French citizen, so we're working on that. But if you see Layla or Enzo running around, feel free to say hi in French or English or whatever. But that's us. So yeah, so let's get to the kind of the meat of this presentation in terms of what I've been working on. Yeah, my project, Immigration, Social Context, and Sustainable Practices in Marseille. So I am working on that right now. What I thought I would do today is basically kind of make a bridge from the work I've done up to now to what I would like to do here in Marseille. So what I want to do, just kind of to have something to focus on, was to bring out a paper I published a couple years ago that really, it really kind of underscores the themes that I'm interested in. I've done the work in the United States, but I'd like to see if it applies more broadly in the world and specifically here in Marseille. So this is Society and Natural Resources a couple years ago, just some of the themes going on here. For that particular paper, I used national data. The General Social Survey, managed out of the University of Chicago, National Opinion Research Center since 1972. Very reliable, representative sample of the United States. 2010 was really important to me because within this national survey, it contained a module, a set of 80 questions on the environment. Okay, they don't do it every year, and that year they did. The other reason it was really important for me in my research was they oversampled Latinos in the United States. So I know many of you are from the States, and most of you are not. Latinos are they're the largest ethnic group right now in the United States. About 1 out of 7 people in the United States is Latino right now. Very rapidly growing portion of the population. A big chunk of that group is also immigrants, the immigrant population. As you might know, this has led to some political controversy in our country. Something I think we have in common with France as well. But immigration obviously looms large in many people's minds these days. So I was happy to see that there was good representation in that survey. So just to kind of go straight to the kind of findings, major findings in the paper. Again, I'm interested in how people perceive risk and their willingness to do things about it. And one of the things that really stood out from this national survey, relative to US-born whites, who right now, by the way, are about 58%, 57% of the population, minority groups such as African Americans, US-born blacks, other race and ethnic groups, and immigrant Latinos, they were much more likely to perceive environmental risks than the majority population in the United States, including climate change and even things like nuclear power generation. So that's interesting. In sociology, there has been for the past few decades a lot of work examining environmental justice. Okay, and what that refers to is when communities kind of very directly experience environmental hazard, be it being proximity to a waste incinerator plant, to chemical industry, for example. And it's often been argued that people, especially maybe lower socioeconomic status, minority groups, are much more likely to kind of be concerned about those things that directly impact their community, their health, for example, lead, for example. In Michigan, this has been a big issue the last few years, though it's a big issue all over the country, actually. But what this survey shows is it's not only these kind of local issues, but the big kind of global things that affect all of us as well. People of color, ethnic minorities, and racial minorities in the United States are much more likely to perceive these risks and actually want to do something about it. I should note in this survey, there were controls, certainly for income, education. I do want to just kind of underscore that there are other, very consistent predictors of concern and perception of risk. Gender in general. In the United States, women perceive risk more so than men. Older people perceive less risk than younger people. Political conservatives seem to be less concerned about the environment than political liberals in the United States. So race and ethnicity is just kind of one among another kind of array of things that kind of can predict people's concern about environmental issues in the U.S. And much of this can also be shown in other parts of the world as well. We'll look at kind of an international comparison in a little bit. Okay, so that's kind of the big picture. What kind of popped out from this data, which I was not expecting, was the Mexican origin immigrant groups in the survey had a particular high concern about environmental issues. So, for example, Mexican immigrants, so people born in Mexico who've moved to the United States, were twice as likely as the majority population of white Americans to report conserving household energy and driving less, doing things like carpooling or taking public transportation. Again, keep in mind, this is, household income and education are controlled in the survey. So this is not purely a matter of frugality. These are people who are willingly doing this. And the way it's stated is so it will help the environment. Mexican immigrants were 4 times as likely as the majority population to conserve water. Okay. I'm not even quite sure why that is the case. Perhaps in Mexico, concern about the quality of water is higher in the United States. That could be part of it. But that, again, very statistically significant association here. Mexican immigrant respondents were 3 times as likely than white respondents to agree to paying higher taxes if they knew that it would help address environmental issues. Again, it's popped out. I was not expecting this, but it was there in the data. Again, check out the paper if you want to see the details about that. But that really popped out. So the kind of maybe the sad news about these higher concerns is once you look at the children of immigrants and the grandchildren of immigrants, this contrast disappears. Okay? It's only the immigrant generation, the people who've moved to the United States, that have these big concerns. Once you look at people like me, 3rd generation Mexican American, or the children of immigrants, on average, I'm concerned, but on average, it's less important. Okay, so this is here's kind of the head scratcher of why. And this is part of why I'm here, and one of the things I'm trying to work out is why is this going on. So I have 3 possible explanations that I want to explore, and hopefully also be able to talk with you guys about as this year goes on. One actually harkens back to work in epidemiology. Called the Latino paradox. And this has been observed for about three decades in the U.S. And that is, on average, foreign-born Latinos, immigrants, have better health outcomes than the children of immigrants or grandchildren, et cetera. Even just the majority population, immigrants in the United States, Latinos in particular, have better health outcomes. So why is that a paradox? Well, if the general narrative you hear about immigration is, well, people come from poor countries, they move to wealthier countries because they're going to be better off, there's more jobs, there's better health care, maybe, There's, all these reasons they should be better off. What this indicates is actually, on average, people are worse off in terms of their health. So here's data from the CDC, 2015. Again, you can go back 25, 30 years at the research on this. And yeah, we're looking at the prevalence of certain types of diseases and health outcomes. So we're comparing US-born Latinos to immigrants, obesity, 30% higher prevalence among native-born in the United States immigrants, 40% higher hypertension, 72% higher rates of smoking among Latinos born in the United States, and about 90% higher rates of heart disease and cancer among Latinos born in the US versus immigrants. Again, this is not just like a one-off, this is like decades of research that back this up. So what I'm maybe kind of grasping for here is that maybe there's a parallel as well, that we can imagine among certain immigrant groups that they arrive, maybe because of where they grew up, where they come from. There's a lot of concern about the environment. Maybe it's much more in their face, the risks, the hazards involved. And then over a generation or so, assimilating into our very kind of materialist, kind of consumer-based society, concern about the environment tends to wane. Okay, so that's, again, that's just a theory, just throwing that out there. But there's certainly, there's a lot of evidence for this type of stuff in epidemiology and the work in public health. Okay, there's another one which I referenced earlier, which is about, maybe I'm just capturing differences in terms of, for whatever, maybe cultural reasons, traditions. There's, in some places there's higher concern or less concern about the environment. So fortunately, the World Values Survey, which has been out for a while now, regularly asks questions about the environment. So I pulled this data up not too long ago, and this is wave 5 of the questions asked between 2010 and 2014. These are not all the countries, but this is an interesting sample of countries. And I'm just using one question. There's no controls for this, but just to kind of give you a sense for what this looks like on average. The question in the World Value Survey I'm looking at is, would you agree with the following statement? Protecting the environment should be given priority, even if it causes slower economic growth and some loss of jobs. So the average in the world, according to the World Value Survey, is a little under 50% of people would agree with that. It's a good question. It's kind of a classic kind of trade-off question, right? I'm not just asking, do you like polar bears, or how do you feel about baby seals, but rather, would you be willing to make a sacrifice if it helped the environment? So it's a good, I like those type of questions. As it turns out, Mexico is far on the left. Something like 62% of Mexicans surveyed in this representative survey said they would agree to that trade-off. And the United States, maybe they're not surprised, I don't know, but is much more on the right here. Something like 38% of Americans agreed to that statement. And you might, just because we're kind of looking at a broader crowd here, it is interesting. Does seem to be a concentration of, and I didn't do this on purpose, but Latin American countries on the left. Uruguay is up there, and Mexico, Colombia, Argentina over here. Some more Morocco, if we're looking here on the Mediterranean basin, is also a bit to the left. Some more kind of European countries, maybe a little bit to the right. But that's kind of how that plays out when we compare across countries. So it would seem that I may be capturing just kind of significant differences between Mexico and the United States. There's another one. This is maybe the most kind of sociological angle on this. I am a sociologist. And this harkens back to social network theory, the concept of multiplexity. So just briefly, what is multiplexity? In a kind of social context, that is where I know you in multiple ways. Okay, not only do we work in the same office, we also we attend the same church, mosque. We also we go. What do we do? Our kids go to the same school. Maybe we go to the same sporting. There's like multiple ways that I know you, and not only that, but in a multiplex context, the community knows everybody in a lot of different ways. Okay? And that's really important in sociology, and especially if you're interested in collective action, the willingness to do things for the common good. A lot of that depends on your trust in other people. Okay, there's in environmental sociology, there's good evidence people are willing to make sacrifices that they trust that other people are willing to do the same thing. So multiplex context may play a role here as well. Alejandro Cortes, I think he's still at Princeton if he hasn't retired yet, He has argued that immigrant communities, in fact, they are kind of a microcosm of multiplexity, especially in kind of big cities in the U.S., Miami, New York, et cetera. That there are places where people are very, very kind of interwoven, know people in multiple cases. So this photo up here, it's a kind of little personal thing as well. This is my, the pointer's not working here. That's my mom. This is about 1937. I really love this photo because it's like the middle of the Great Depression, right? It's like really difficult times around the world. But my mom, it's an immigrant family. There on the top, there's my grandfather and my grandmother. Passed away long before I knew them. But so they came to the U.S. My mom's the last of 13 kids on a farm, very, very interdependent. They all worked together, went to the same church, the same schools. And even though this is the middle of the Great Depression, this is like one of the happiest times in my mom's life. She always thinks very fondly of this time, a very multiplex context. Of course, there's many, obviously, thousands, hundreds, millions of examples of migrant lives that are very, dependent on their multiplex ties. Maybe, just maybe, that has something to do with people having a greater sense of trust, and maybe has something to do with the willingness to do something for the collective good. So those are things, again, it kind of pops up kind of in the more kind of quantitative data I've been working with. I'd like to take more of a kind of a qualitative angle. How much do I got? Do I got like 5 minutes? Okay, excellent, perfect. Okay, so just kind of tie this back in. So what about France and the U.S.? Well, there's actually, especially if we look at the 20th century, there's some interesting parallels here. Both countries, and actually if we look at Marseille in particular, early 20th century immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe, very, very important. That really shifted, in that mid-century, 1960s. The move, many fewer people from other parts of Europe, for example, coming both to France and the U.S., to other parts of the world. In the U.S., it was Latin America and Asia. France, obviously, a shift to especially post-colonial countries, Maghreb, Africa, also parts of Asia, so that the origins of people changed as well. Both countries, as I mentioned earlier, continue, the question of immigration just dominates politics. Just look at the last presidential election in both countries, I guess, well, anyway, it looms large. So that's certainly the context. It's different, but there's some factors in terms of the perceptions, the concerns, the way scapegoating has been used to motivate people and whatnot. It is out there. We are surrounded by that right now. The other thing, which maybe you forgot about this, but back in 2016, both countries were consignatories to the Paris Agreement on climate change. And in both, well, the United States, where the Trump administration says they're getting out of it, they will not officially be out of it until like election day 2020. I forget the technical details behind that. And of course, in France, the big controversy of whether or not any change, any effort has actually been made to kind of move in that direction has also been politically salient in even the last few weeks here in France. So there's, again, different countries, but there's a lot of common global things affecting both of us. That's kind of the kind of bigger way of looking at that. What I want to do is take advantage of the fact that we live in a very kind of diverse context, obviously, not just in terms of immigrant origin, but also in terms of socioeconomic class, which I think is really, that might be even the more important kind of level of difference here in Marseille, and see how people of kind of different groups, different socioeconomic class, different kind of race and ethnic origins, itself a topic that is a little more difficult to talk about in France. We can maybe talk about another time, but could do a presentation on that actually. But how people from these different backgrounds perceive nature, perceive the environment, especially given, for example, that Paris, in the Paris Agreement, France would eventually agree to do a kind of a national curriculum to kind of make sure that climate and sustainability is taught in the classroom. So that's one angle I have, is how is that perceived? I have a set of questions. I'm not going to kind of go through that right now, but kind of qualitative questions you might ask about, what do you do outside? What is your relationship with the environment? What do you do with your kids? that has to do with the natural world. I think Marseille is a really important place because not only are all these kind of sociological elements, but it's just like, you know, the sea is in your face, right? You're surrounded by nature. You know, how do people kind of you know, reconcile that and deal with living in kind of post-industrial city in front of the Mediterranean Sea? Those type of contextual questions I'm interested in, and how people feel about environmental issues, including climate. So I guess I'll leave it at that, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Let me first.